morning, everybody. I spent the last 48 hours going over every formula in Olivia's paper.
Did you find any mistakes?
There was one misplaced sigma. Seriously, very happy to be here today to talk about something that is really near and dear to FINRA's Foundation's heart, and that's financial capability. And by the way, I've enjoyed the panelist presentations as well, so thank you for your work on that. Now, I must stipulate, Anna said that this is not your grandfather's discussant role. You need to know that going in, that I'm not going to address each paper in turn. Rather, what we're going to do is talk at a high level about some ideas that we have that complement the panelists' views and hopefully get some discussion going. So with that in mind, here's how we'll start. First of all, I love the structure of this panel because it covered a nice swath of topics. So Ari covered data collection, and Chris, among other things, covered what are some of the drivers of financial capability in terms of demographics and regional differences. And Olivia talked about, was a nice cap, the consequences of financial knowledge. What can it lead to in terms of wealth inequality? And of course, Anna even touched on the international aspect. So we had a really broad view of financial capability, so a great way to start the day. What I'd like to do is complement what's been discussed so far by talking about the National Financial Capability Study and where that fits into understanding and measuring financial capability. And also so that'll be the first part of my 10 minutes, I believe. And the second part will be throwing out some ideas for research, given the data that exists and some of the opportunities that we have. So just to get, I know some of the people in this room, but just to get everybody on the same page, a little bit of background on the National Financial Capability Study. The first one was run in 2009, and the goal of the study is to get a baseline measure of financial capability in America, and Anna wants me to do a little promo here. So this was a report that came out in 2009. It summarizes what I'll call the NFCS. So again, establish a baseline measure of financial capability among American adults 18 and over. And up until that point, we really didn't have that type of information. Now, one thing you need to know about the financial capability study is it's broad. It covers a lot of topics. And in our conversations with researchers, one limitation is you can't go deep on a lot of topics. So the benefit is you get a really good sense, a really comprehensive view of financial capability, but you can't go really deep on some questions. But I'm going to talk about the ALP in a little while and how we can get around that limitation as well. But it's a broad picture of financial capability. So the 2009 version had 3 waves. The first was a random digit dial study of 1,500 participants, nationally representative. The second, which Chris talked about, was what we call the state-by-state study. And the state-by-state study had 28,000 respondents, roughly 500 per state, plus the District of Columbia. And we did that for 2 reasons. One, we wanted a large sample size. And I joke about this, but I know you researchers love your degrees of freedom, and we wanted to give you guys plenty of degrees of freedom. So there you have it. But we also want to be able to do some regional cuts, as Chris showed. The ability to do some regional dives is important to us, and that was another reason for the state-by-state. And last, we did a military survey, where we interviewed 800 military respondents to get their sense of, to get a measure of their financial capability. So that's 2009. Now fast forward to 2012, 3 years later, and right now we're working on the 2012 version of the survey. And to do this, to update the survey, we reached out to a lot of researchers, practitioners, policymakers, and dating back actually to November of last year, we started reaching out to people saying, what do you think? Especially people who have used the data. What do you think? What should change? What should stay the same? How would you like to see things structured? So we got a lot of great feedback, and we updated the survey. We're actually putting the final touches on the 2012 questionnaire, and we're waiting on Anna here. No pressure, Hannah. But by the seriously, this weekend.
No rest for the oppressed.
Anyway, we're finalizing the 2012 survey very, very shortly, we plan, and I think Chris even mentioned this, we plan to be in the field in July, August, September, October, and have a data set ready in early 2013. So what's new in 2012? And this is an important question because what's new in 2012 is really going to drive what research questions can be addressed, and also even how you can address old research questions with perhaps new items and new data. But when you consider what's in the 2012 version, we do have to take a step back and understand that an important aspect of the National Financial Capability Study is tracking. I already mentioned that. So over a 3-year period, what has changed? So we need a core group of questions that don't change from administration to administration. That said, we also know the world has changed pretty dramatically in the last 3 years. So we need to kind of take a look and say, hey, what content areas do we need to add to reflect the changing environment, and what content areas would be interesting for researchers that would really get researchers using the data? And you know, that was actually a pretty difficult balance to strike. We struggled with that mightily, and we think we came out with a nice balance, but it is something to keep in mind that it's part tracking study and it's part new material. So that said, what did we add? We added a section on student loans. Again, that was a bit of a no-brainer. Everybody wanted to know about student loan debt. Big topic, hot topic. We added a section on better assessing and measuring exposure to financial education. So were you exposed to it? Did you take advantage of what was offered to you? And was it high school, was it college, et cetera? So we'll have a much more refined way to measure financial education exposure. What else did we add? My notes here. A money management section, prepaid cards, mobile banking. How does money come into your accounts? Where does it go? How do you pay your bills, et cetera? Housing. There's obviously a housing crisis going on right now, so we had some questions on housing, and finally some questions on debt as well. So those are the new areas. Another improvement we made, which I'll come back to in a minute or two, is we are going to run the National Financial Capability Study through the American Life Panel. And we're going to do that for and I won't talk much about it. I already did a great job covering it, but we're going to do that for 2 reasons. One, a number of researchers had come to us and said, hey, you know what? It would be really, really nice to have some longitudinal capabilities for the National Financial Capability Study. In other words, to be able to follow someone over time. And the ALP allows us to do that. The other reason was researchers also came to us and said, hey, it'd be great to be able to integrate the National Financial Capability data with other data sources like the HRS and like all the surveys that have gone through the ALP. And again, the ALP allows us to do that integration. So that's really going to expand our analytical capabilities in 2012. So new research opportunities. So let's think of the 10 minutes. Part 1 was, I have 3 minutes left. It was 5. Who's counting? But the
tell her the deadline is tonight.
Don't give me till Sunday. Okay, so that's the background. So some new research opportunities, and when we think about research opportunities, we have, and I'm talking about research opportunities both with the 2009 data and the 2012 data. And we have to kind of take into consideration that, quite frankly, the 2009 data was not used as heavily as we would have liked. Now, from a media perspective, it was great. The national and regional media, they were always calling us up asking for statistics, but researchers didn't really gravitate to the data as quickly as we had hoped. And maybe that was because it was new. To date, there's been about 2 or 3 published articles, depending on how you count, and about Baker's dozen white papers, but more are coming. But the bottom line is we really want to encourage, we want to increase the awareness of the data, and we want to encourage usage of the data. So, and we want to do that for 2 reasons. One, you know, when we think to 2015, it's important from a funding perspective that we could say, hey, this data is being used. I mean, we plan on doing this every 3 years. The 2015 wave isn't funded yet. We still need to make a case for it. So it's a lot easier to make a case for data when you could say, hey, we got dozens and dozens and dozens of researchers using this data. That's important. But I think more importantly, you know, the FINRA Foundation genuinely wants to kind of further the understanding of financial capability, improve it, and be able to measure that improvement. And the National Financial Capability Study is a good way to do that. So with that backdrop, I think there's some interesting questions that can be asked, particularly in 2012. There's all the new topics that I just talked about, student loans and housing and like. But I think the more important, more interesting questions that we'll be able to ask are the pre-post questions. So the 2009 version took place after the collapse of 2008. But what we have is basically, we span the Great Depression. We have measures before the Great Depression, and we have measures, well, I don't know if it's after, but hopefully it's getting towards the end. So all sorts of pre-post measures on things like financial literacy, financial fragility, even satisfaction. We have some satisfaction questions in. The use of alternative financial services, housing. How have all these things changed between 2009 and 2012? It is a very interesting time period. The last point I'll make, because I know I'm pretty much out of time, is I just want to come back to the ALP because there's just so many opportunities there. Yeah, I come to the table from a psychological perspective, and over the last 4 or 5 months, there's been a lot of talk about, hey, maybe we should start linking personality measures to financial capability. There hasn't really been a lot of work done there. So one example is send a battery, the big 5 personality measures, send a battery of personality questions through the ALP, tie it to the National Financial Capability measures, and boom, you have a rich data set to tie psychological measures to financial capability measures. So that's one area I'd really think would be an interesting area to explore. And the other is, and Ari alluded to this, is the ability to be able to basically submit interventions to the panel. So we'll have 2,000 people that will have a bunch of measures on, financial literacy measures, financial capability measures. You could send them a YouTube video on financial education. Okay, view this video. Has anything changed? You could send them vignettes and scenarios. You could send all types of interventions through the panel and then get a post measure. The pre-measure already exists. It's there. So in a sense, we're opening the door and saying, hey, we have this pre-measure. Researchers definitely think about going out there, using some interventions and getting some post measures and seeing what we could learn. So I think I'm pretty much up with the time. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and looking forward to the rest of the